What are the keys for being a good parent?
Well, I could think of about 10 or 12 major ones. I only touch one or two just because we want to keep this to 2-3 minutes. But I think a critical key is consistency, meaning that in our children, they're in their 30s right now. And so when they were in their age 5, 10, 15, one key thing was consistency, that what we said we needed to follow through on. Meaning when I would tell them I will be home to play soccer with you at 3 o'clock, if I was home at 10 minutes after 3, not at 3, I didn't make a big deal out of it, but I made a point to always acknowledge it. I would look at them, I say, Dad said I would be home at 3. I'm home at 10 after. That's not what I said. And I would look at them and say, I just want to tell you, I apologize. They never cared. But for me to acknowledge when I did not do what I said I would do, even if it's a little late, to not acknowledge it is a great problem in my opinion, because then they never know what I mean by what I say. And then when I would put a restriction on them and they did not keep that restriction, we would have a discussion. It didn't always end up with a SWAT. When they were younger, they'd get 1 SWAT or they would get 2 SWATs for various things. And I believe in that. The Bible teaches that. But we would, more times than a SWAT, we would have dialogue. And so when they would not uphold the things we agreed upon that they should do, instead of me ignoring it and saying, boys will be boys, I'd say, come on, we got to talk about it for a minute. We got to acknowledge you did not hold to the things we agreed to. Because if you don't acknowledge it, and sometimes the penalty was just stopping for the discussion. They go, oh no, we gotta have this discussion. Sometimes it was a timeout. They would go to the room for 10 minutes or 30 minutes, depending on the age. Sometimes it would be extra work around the house. Sometimes we would take a privilege away from them one time. They can't go out for an hour. Or, there's various ways to do that. And then there are other times there is a time to give a SWAT. But the point is, if I'm not consistent, I have to acknowledge it. When I don't do what I say, when Mom doesn't do what she says, we had to stop for a minute and acknowledge it. When they did not do what we agreed upon together, we had to acknowledge it. If they saw us watching them not keep what we said and we did nothing, that confused them. That would confuse them. We were quite consistent about that. Meaning, but there were times where I actually caught them doing things wrong and I didn't have the energy to follow through, so I didn't let them know I caught them. So there was no confusion in them. I said, to my wife, Diane, I said, I'm too tired to do nothing, but they don't know I caught them, so I'm going to let it go. But if they know I saw it and did nothing, that is a setback. That's not good, because then they had confusion. Like, does it mean that we obey if you raise your voice? Does it obey if you say it 3 times? I mean, when do we have to obey? So I think consistency is really critical in what they do and what we do. And of course, nobody's totally consistent, but if we acknowledge it on either side, we have a little dialogue about it, then I believe we keep that intact. So I think that's one of the most important, though I could think of about 10 that I would put in the category 10 principles of the most important. Another thing would be the affirmation, a 10-to-1 affirmation, 10 affirmations for 1 correction. And another thing is taking time to dialogue. I found out when we gave them the why behind the what did not infuriate them. But some parents that say, I'm going to teach you authority, and it doesn't matter what the why is, it's because I said it. And I think that we don't have to take that kind of approach. The I said it and kids are to be seen and not heard. That was an old phrase back in the old days. Now, I would say, do you understand? Matter of fact, I would ask them if they understand. When we made family guidelines, things they could not do, we actually dialogued it with them on the front end. And some of them were really obvious. You can't steal. You can't talk back to your mother. You can't beat up the neighbor boys. They're real obvious. But we would lay them out and I would ask them, is this right? Then they would say, well, yes. Then I would say, why is it right? Then I would ask them what the penalty should be. And I actually jotted some of these down and say, okay, so you think that if you do this, the penalty should be that? They go, yes. Then when they had an infraction of that, I would sit down and say, this is what we agreed upon a month ago. And so I think that dialogue is so helpful, and there's a relational dimension to it. And even in that process, you're training them to be parents. Like one question I would always ask them, they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I would ask them, my 2 boys, they're only about a year apart. I would say, now when you are older and you have sons or daughters, what are you going to do when they do what you just did? And they would give me the answer. Then I would say, why are you going to do that? And they would give me the answer. Now here's the bizarre part. They would almost always give me a more severe penalty than I wanted to give them. Like I remember a number of times I said, what will you do to your sons and daughters? They deserve 3 swats. I go, no, not 3 swats. That's too intense. Why 3 swats? To teach them, to show them the truth. They're 6 and 7. I go, no, that's too intense. I go, maybe a timeout. How about a timeout? And it was hilarious to me. They're very sincere. It wasn't joking matter to them that they were more strict than I was when we discussed it ahead of time. But I found that discussing it ahead of time and having a degree of consistency, meaning we acknowledged it when we were not consistent, is critical. And again, I could lay out 10 other principles that important, but that's one I'll highlight.
So just a short little question. You talked about swatting. Spanking has become a controversial issue to many in mainstream media. Do you believe spanking is a biblical
Yes.
form of correction?
One guy wrote a book, Larry Tomczak. He said, God the rod and your child's bod, or something. It was quite clever. Absolutely. I totally believe in that. I believe it should be done in a context of affirmation. It should be done understanding the rules ahead of time. And again, dialoguing with them on the front end, even outlining the penalty long before they break it. And then after, I would give them a swat, and I gave them swats a number of times, maybe age 4 or 5, and they would be gentle swats when they're younger. Basically, it made a point, just a little wooden spoon on the leg, and they paid attention to that. When I picked up that little spoon, they, oh no, and it was quite harmless, And then by the time they were about 10 years old, I don't think we ever gave them a swat past age 8, 9, 10. I mean, I could have, but it never came to that because we were somewhat consistent in those earlier years. And I don't want to make a big point of my consistency. That's not my point. But if it was the biggest and most important subject in my life, the consistency in this, because you got that window from about age 3 to about 10. And if you're pretty consistent and you acknowledge it when you're not consistent, then a whole lot less negativity happens from age 10 on. And those are just kind of ballpark numbers. I mean, every child is different.